Good evening. Weeknight, we begin this hour with breaking news. Donald Trump just announced that Israel and Hamas have signed off on the first phase of a peace plan. That is all we know at this stage. We're going to be joined in a moment by Laura Barron Lopez at the White House. But for now, Simone, you and I have talked very often about what actually goes into these negotiations.
Yes. Now, it's our understanding, and we'll have Laura Barron Lopez from the White House in just a moment, who's on the beat, who's been covering this. But what has been happening is that there were negotiations. Obviously, earlier today, there was a very dramatic scene at the White House where during this meeting, if you will, with the president, Secretary Rubio passes a note to the president. Rubio then comes and replaces Susie Wiles sitting there, White House Chief of Staff. The president reads the note out loud, noting that they will need him soon because they're very close to a deal between Hamas. Very close to a deal in these negotiations between Hamas and Israel. Now, to back up, and, you know, I'm no Andrea Mitchell here, but we have been talking about this for a while. The details of what this is are going to be very important. My first question when I heard this is, well, who exactly were they negotiating with? Because if we remember, over the course of the last couple of months, really, the negotiating leadership of Hamas has been decimated, taken out in various different ways by the government of Israel in these operations that were led by Mossad. So usually, if a deal was actually reached and everything is on paper and it's been signed, there would be a lot of pomp and circumstance. You would hear from the president, frankly, very directly from the White House, perhaps in Cross Hall, iconic hallway. That is where President Obama, when the raid on Osama bin Laden, he was killed, happened. That is where he spoke from. Donald Trump, we may see him from his desk in the Oval Office, right? He may decide to go to the briefing room. But again, we're looking to get details. We're scant on the details, but if a deal has been signed, who signed that deal? What are the contours of that deal, and what are the actionable items? We have been here before, where they say, you know, the White House says we have a deal, and come to find out the details are not as monumental as we have thought before.
And Michael, while we wait for those details, one detail we do know have is that a spokesperson for the Qatari government has affirmed that, in fact, an agreement has been reached with all parties.
Yeah, okay, let's see. I'm a trust but verify kind of guy. I want to see what the deal says. I want to see what Hamas has exactly signed off on. We've been here before. There's a lot that's going on domestically, politically for this president. And this just happens to land at the right time to sort of create another lane of conversation. Now, with that in mind, how serious is it? Are all the parties in the Middle East apprised of this, signed off on this? Does Hamas agree? Because no, what the president says in his tweet is, you know, we agreed upon line as the first steps towards.
Right. This is
the first steps. I mean, so everybody, let's slow the roll here and start those peace in the Middle East conversation. This is the first step. Phases that, A, we don't know the contours of, B, we don't know how many other steps are going to be involved in this or that are necessary. This is a complicated dance, obviously. A lot of players have a lot of interest at stake here. And so I just want to hear more. I mean, I appreciate the tweet, but it's just a tweet. It's not something that's come out of the State Department. It's something that's come from Netanyahu's office. Yes, we have other parties that are starting to say there is a deal. But again, no one is saying what the deal is.
You know, I do think it's important to note that the humanitarian toll that this war between Israel and Hamas has taken is on the people that have been devastated by this, the Palestinian people, the Israeli people. This war has been raging, particularly this recent iteration triggered after that very fateful day on October 7th, where Hamas attacked Israel. Literally, it was just harrowing to think about it. We're over 2 years later now. It seems to be the first phase of a deal in the peace plan in Gaza. I think things to look for are, what do other partners say, right? Other partners in the region. What else do Western allies say? Remember, not a week ago, about a week and a half ago, during UNGA, the UN General Assembly in New York, a number of Western allies recognized the Palestinian state. And they gave speeches, everyone from President Macron to the UK, the Prime Minister of the UK, so on and so forth. This was monumental. Other countries obviously have done so previously, well in advance in the past, but to have so many Western allies, major players recognize Palestine as a state was also a monumental piece in this. Notably, the United States did not participate in that. The president came out.
The partners walk away from a Palestinian state once they've gone out publicly and said that's what they support.
Well, again, this is why we need to look at the details of the plan, because for everyone, they have always said, except Prime Minister Netanyahu, that a two-state solution is the only solution. I believe we now have Laura Barron Lopez. She is joining us now from the White House. Laura, take us inside what you know at this hour. We, according to the president and the Qatari Prime Minister, there is a deal.
Yes, there's a first phase agreement. There's an agreement to the first phase of this deal. So obviously there are other points to the initial peace plan that the president released a week ago when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was here at the White House. And this first phase of the agreement initially was supposed to include a ceasefire, the release of all hostages in Gaza in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Now, according to the president's post tonight, he didn't exactly mention Palestinian prisoners in there. So there's a number of details that we're still waiting to hear. But all day long, Simone, at this White House, we'd been waiting to see if there was going to be some update because the Middle Eastern envoy Steve Witkoff, as well as the president's son-in-law Jared Kushner, arrived in Egypt for those peace deal negotiation talks with the Qataris, with Turkish leaders, between Israel and Hamas. And the president, a few hours before this announcement on his Truth Social platform, said that he thought that they were very close, that he may end up traveling to the Middle East this weekend on Saturday or Sunday in the hopes that he would be there for some type of ceasefire signing. But again, we don't know if they are going to be able to reach a full deal by this weekend.
I think, Laura, that's the nub of all of this. Are you hearing anything specifically or even tangentially around the rest of the deal that touches on the Palestinian state, that touches on the lines of demarcation in the region, the balance of power, what this looks like? The hostage piece, important. Humanitarian peace, good to get that settled. But then the rest of this seems to me to be a little bit more difficult ahead. And like you said, and to get it done by this weekend could be tough.
It could be. And no, unfortunately, Michael, we're not hearing whether or not those other key elements of this deal are going to be falling into place. We saw that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who also serves as the national security advisor to the president, was here as well, was standing next to the president, passing him a note earlier today saying that they were very close to a deal. And we saw an AP photographer take a photo of that note. So that's how we know that that's what it said on there. And then later on, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance were in the Oval with President Trump, appearing to talk through the potential particulars of at least this first phase agreement of a deal. But again, there is a lot of information, I should stress, that we still don't have, especially if they think that they are going to come to an agreement in the next few days.
And we are following what it looks like when Donald Trump calls in an indictment, which he publicly did, a Nixonian admission that he wanted someone he opposes or doesn't like to be charged, James Comey. That individual has been charged, and today it turns to court. It's really happening. The former FBI director appeared in court for the first time since the DOJ indictment. So this is the beginning of the case. This is the beginning, if you will, of the process that leads to a trial if the case holds and isn't tossed before then. He pled not guilty today to the charges of lying to Congress back in 2020 around issues that stem all the way back to Trump's first term. It's a pivotal moment in how this DOJ has continued to bend to things that we know from the public record its own prosecutors and internal staff appointed by Trump thought were wrong, bending to things that they didn't want to do, sometimes having to change staff, Trump ousting the prosecutor there in order to get what he sees as his revenge indictments. Now, Comey has long been the subject of clashing with Trump, all the way back to how he did what he and others saw as his job. And remember, these issues have long already been investigated. They've been reviewed by the DOJ's internal process. They were reviewed by a prosecutor handpicked by Trump, John Durham, and other reviews. None of this, whatever one thinks of it, has ever been seen by any other prior process to involve any misconduct of a criminal nature by James Comey. And yet that is what Trump demanded be charged and what got charged. So we take a look back at a history that goes all the way to Trump's first presidential campaign.
The FBI director told Congress he is investigating
whether there was any coordination between people associated with the Trump campaign and the Russians.
The FBI, James Comey, has been fired.
Look, I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope there are tapes. Led to the indictment of dozens of people. The head of Trump's campaign was a grave counterintelligence threat.
Former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey are under criminal investigation for.
In the Trump era, I've been investigated a lot, audited a lot, and so it's not my first rodeo.
Former FBI Director James Comey has just been indicted on 2 counts of.
There are costs to standing up to Donald Trump, but we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees.
The last statement there was Comey's video presentation, a kind of video public accounting for what he says are the costs of opposing Donald Trump. And let's call it like it is. Let's be straight. James Comey has been controversial on the left, right, and center for a bunch of stuff. But nobody who honestly has reviewed him or criticized him, and he has been criticized for his leadership, for his approach to the FBI on this and other newscasts. But nobody who seriously looked at this thought there were crimes there. Remember, there's no new evidence that we've seen yet. If they have new criminal evidence, we'll report on it. But all of this goes back to him testifying to Congress about prior activities regarding talking to the press, press releases, press leaks, right? An authorized statement versus a leak. But none of that has ever led, as I remind you, to anything that anyone thought was a crime, including Donald Trump's hand-picked prosecutor, John Durham. So it's important to keep that in mind, because whatever Comey's popularity, all of the evidence that we have in public suggests this is the old stuff that even Trump's people didn't think amounted to evidence to charge, that now is being charged because the president phoned it in, possibly unlawfully, possibly illegally. The indictment related to that history was not brought in the normal course by the normal prosecutor. One prosecutor ousted, another brought in, and before she had what any lawyer would tell you is enough time to go through the facts and the evidence and the case and the witnesses, she just rushed in for a deadline and charged it. And no one else would sign their name next to what she put. The Times reports 2 prosecutors in North Carolina now have been assigned to the case because she had, quote, a hard time getting anyone in her new office to help. Think about what the Times is reporting. Her new office is in the Trump administration. These are all Trump people, but many of them say it's not a real case. You might violate your legal duties to pursue it, or they don't want to be a part of a clunker that could turn into a loser. She did not speak in court today. She was reportedly in her chair nodding when a junior prosecutor represented the department. She was the only prosecutor to sign the indictment. I'm going to remind you of that, like I said there. And the indictment itself doesn't have a lot of evidence. It's 2 pages. It's about congressional testimony. Comey's team is out there going on offense today, and with all due respect, they have a legal team, several DOJ lawyers with far more experience than the new prosecutor that Trump called in. They say they haven't even been given real specifics on the charges, that they are going at the whole case, seeking its dismissal, and they're going to use Trump's words against him, saying that they have evidence to prove, and these aren't just any random defense lawyers. These are some very skilled, decorated DOJ veterans, one who worked as a Republican, Fitzgerald, investigating high-level matters. They say they can prove, they think, that it's a, quote, vindictive and selective prosecution. They also say this new hand-picked prosecutor might have problems of validity. The government doesn't have a lot of details, but they claim they need more time to introduce what they call classified evidence. The judge already, on this first day leading to the trial, quote, skeptical of the claim that the nature of this, remember, we're talking about public testimony about issues that have been discussed for years. If this weren't so important, some people might say, I'm a little tired of stories about the Clintons and James Comey. But of course, this is Trump's revenge tour. This is what he wants everyone to focus on. And the judge is skeptical that there's going to be new classified evidence. The Times said it kind of projected an air of polite impatience on the first day of Trump team's effort to prosecute the former FBI director. Quote, "This does not appear to me to be an overly complicated case," the judge added, again striking at the obvious. There isn't a ton of new evidence against the director. What there is old evidence that was previously dismissed, found lacking by perfectly motivated Trump appointees who, had they had the case before, would have presumably been willing to bring it. Indeed, they take an oath to bring cases that are supported by the evidence. Now, a new prosecutor, lonely in her office, doing Trump's bidding, and today seemingly outgunned by some of the more experienced counsel against her, is going to try to take the director to trial. That trial, if there is no intervening event, will be set for January. We're joined by Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and Mueller probe prosecutor. Welcome.
Nice to be here.
Let's start with the little bit of new. We did hear for the first time from a judge assessing what is a very thin slice of this, because we're not at trial. What did you make of the judge's reception today?
Well, what he was responding to was the first of what I believe will be many efforts by the government to slow the case down. They were clearly not doing what normally a prosecutor does, which is like, we're ready for trial, let's go, let's set a date. Remember, this is the so-called rocket docket. Yep. And so the government said, Judge, you should delay the trial because it's complex. Under something called the speedy trial rules, if you could declare something complex, the government's given more time. A false statement case, which is 2 counts, is very unlikely to be a complex case, and that's what the judge is reacting to. But the news here, the sort of the import of it, is the government is going to be, and I think this is going to be the first of many efforts by them to slow the case down. Yeah. If they don't have a winning hand, any day that the case is not dismissed or they do not lose the case at trial is a good day for the government. This is an unusual position for the government to be in. And I thought they looked very weak today in a false statement case, showing up and saying, Judge, please delay the case because it's complex. I mean, that felt facially not terribly plausible.
Right. You're saying that alone makes them look bad. And on simple cases, this is clearly a simple case. It's not a RICO case. It's not a bunch of organizational evidence. It's a couple of discrete facts, as the judge said. And as you know, having been a prosecutor, Andrew, there's a bit of what they sometimes call the Lauryn Hill rule, where confident prosecutors say, ready or not, here I come, you can't hide. And you're telling us we're getting the opposite from the Trump prosecutor, saying, I need more time. I'm basically not ready. And maybe they are a little bit afraid. They're the ones hiding from what this could ultimately look like. With that in mind, you can say, OK, Weissmann said this. The news anchor said that. What about more Republican veterans of the DOJ? Here was new from Andrew McCarthy, well-known, I'd say pretty conservative prosecutor type. But here's what he said.
I don't believe they have a case, Bill, based on what we've seen in the indictment and what we know from the public reporting. But now we're going to find out. I just think that factually they have a very difficult time making this case.
Andrew?
I agree. And I point out just another aspect of the weakness, which is one of the things that they said to the court, the government did, is another reason to delay this case is because there's going to be so much classified information. And we're going to need to do litigation under what's called the CIPA statute, which governs how to deal with classified documents. Again, that remains to be seen, but that does not seem to be the case here, that this is going to be a case that involves lots of classified documents. So between the statement about please exclude speedy trial time and give us more time because it's complex, and the government saying, oh, there's lots of classified documents, so that's going to involve this complicated process about how to deal with classified documents. Those are both weak statements. And it's understandable because the trial team, as you noted, Ari, are not the trial team that had been on the case investigating it. They are brought in from outside. So they clearly are not ready. But that is so unusual. I want to make sure people understand. The government's, when you indict a case, you need to be ready. Your only responsible response to the court is when you set the trial date, we will be ready. Otherwise, don't bring the case. And so it was really quite a weak showing on their part.
Former FBI Director James Comey was arraigned in a federal court in Virginia today following repeated calls by President Trump to prosecute him. Comey pleaded not guilty. His lawyer told the judge they would move to quickly dismiss the case, calling it a vindictive and selective prosecution. No cameras were in the court, but you could see Comey's family arriving, including, crucially, his daughter. Remember his daughter, former federal prosecutor Maureen Comey, right there next to her mother. You may remember Maureen Comey helped prosecute the case against Ghislaine Maxwell and was abruptly fired by Trump's DOJ this summer with no explanation. First-time prosecutor Lindsay Halligan, who's never prosecuted a case in her entire life, who was handpicked by Trump to be the U.S. attorney after the existing U.S. attorney was pushed out over his refusal to indict Comey. She was there along with the two prosecutors she added to the case only yesterday, admitting in court they weren't quite up to speed. Quote, "We're just getting our hands around the discovery." One of them saying there's a large amount of discovery. But the judge rejected the prosecution's request for more time and set a trial date for January 5th, if it ever reaches trial. Joyce Vance is former U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. She worked with James Comey attorney Patrick Fitzgerald at the Department of Justice. Christy Greenberg is former deputy chief of the Criminal Division of the Southern District of New York, and they both join me now. Joyce, first, what did we learn today from the arraignment, if anything?
You know, it's really interesting. The Eastern District of Virginia is the first court that I ever practiced in. I was barred in Virginia as a brand new lawyer. And if you practice in that courthouse, you understand that there is a rocket docket there, that the court moves very quickly. But it was clear that these two prosecutors brought in from the Eastern District of North Carolina didn't get that message in advance of arraignments today. And so they expressed to the judge that they needed more time. And I suspect that he was rather incredulous to get that reaction from them. Pat Fitzgerald, Jim Comey's defense lawyer, was similarly, I think, inclined to make it clear that they did not understand the playing field, suggesting, for instance, that they were ready to go to trial very quickly and that he didn't understand why prosecutors hadn't resolved information about classified evidence before indicting the case.
Chrissy, one thing that we've seen with Trump is to use time and courts in a specific way, right? To draw things out when that's advantageous, to rush things along when that's advantageous, and that in each of these ways you can achieve kind of ends that are independent of the ultimate disposition of the case. And it struck me today as I watched this. I mean, first of all, there is a logistical problem, right? No one in this office is clearly going to prosecute this case because all the line attorneys think it's a travesty of justice. But it also occurred to me that, from the Trump perspective, the whole point is for Comey to be under a cloud, to be indicted, to be facing this prosecution more than it is some final rendering of a verdict.
Right. I mean, a few things struck me today. One is we still don't know what the false statements are. I mean, that
as
was
they've
one
raised,
of the things
yes.
that Pat Fitzgerald said. Is like, I mean, I've never seen an indictment where you charge a false statement and we're all guessing about what the false statement is. Pat Fitzgerald said, I still don't know who person 1 and person 3 are. I've had no substantive conversations with the defense until yesterday. So Lindsay Halligan, basically the insurance lawyer, kind of came in on a Monday. By Thursday, she's indicting the case. And then 2 weeks go by, she hasn't talked to the defense at all. And she kind of punted this thing to these two junior prosecutors who clearly don't know what's going on. And, I marvel at the fact that they actually got up in court and said, well, we may need more time for this to go to trial because the case is complex. Complex. She charged it within a matter of days. How is it complex? She clearly was able to wrap her head around it. And, again, this idea that there was a large amount of discovery kind of tells you it is highly likely she didn't review all of those materials between the Monday and the Thursday, right? Like she didn't look at all of this. And to present a case to a grand jury without being fully versed in what those materials are, particularly when you have a memo from career prosecutors that say, not just that we don't think we can obtain a conviction here, but that we think proceeding here would violate DOJ policy and may raise ethical issues.
Right.
I mean, like red flags all over the place. Like you don't present that case to the grand jury without saying, hey, you know what? If I'm a responsible lawyer and I've also never prosecuted a case before, I better take a look at all this and make sure I'm comfortable. But that's clearly not what happened here. She got her marching orders and from Donald Trump, and she followed them. And so, you know, I think regardless of what the timing is, they are going to be exposed here. This is not how you proceed. They are going to be exposed in any number of ways. I don't think it will get to trial. I think this will be dismissed because she's not properly appointed. But I mean, this is going to be a farce.
Yeah, on that point, right? I mean, Patrick Fitzgerald says we're going to file motions clearly around selective and malicious prosecution, for which there's a high bar. But on that point, we got new reporting at the Wall Street Journal tonight that message that Trump posted to Pam Bondi online was meant to be basically a DM that he accidentally posted publicly. He meant to send a private message urging her prosecution of FBI Director James Comey and his other favorite targets. We can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation. He believed he had sent Bondi the message directly, addressing it to Pam, was surprised to learn it was public. Bondi grew upset, called the White House aides Trump, who then agreed to send a second post praising her as doing a great job. 5 days after the Saturday evening message, Comey was indicted. It strikes me that that's materially relevant to the filings that Pat Fitzgerald is going to make on Comey's behalf, Joyce, that this is selective and malicious prosecution.
So look, Pat Fitzgerald has seen a lot of lawyers attempt to file selective and vindictive prosecution motions and fails. He understands what the law is here, and the highest standard for people trying to make this argument is actual vindictiveness, that the government had actual vindictiveness towards their client over the exercise of their rights. If this DM isn't evidence of that, I don't know what is. I think that this case will be dismissed on this ground, perhaps on selective prosecution too, which is the suggestion that the government is targeting your client for prosecution that wouldn't be brought against anyone else. In this case, everything the government does makes the defense's motion stronger. You know, the story we were all talking about a couple of days ago about the Trump administration trying to find a couple of beefy FBI agents so they could perp walk Jim Comey into the courthouse in front of the press. Well, that again is evidence of vindictiveness, that they're trying to humiliate this defendant, not prosecute him for legitimate criminal conduct. I don't think this case makes it to trial.
I'll just note to the viewer that Joyce's selection of the adjective beefy there comes directly from the reporting. That was what those were reporting. They were looking for beefy agents, Joyce Vance and Christy Greenberg.
Thank you for saving me.
Thank you very much.
Joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent and host of Can They Do That on YouTube, Lisa Rubin, and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. All right, so Lisa, you were inside the courtroom today. Describe what you saw.
Katie, it was an absolutely surreal and bizarre experience to see someone who has been sort of a firmament of the federal law enforcement establishment, Jim Comey, have to stand up and enter a plea today of not guilty. Also tell the judge, Judge Michael Nachmanoff of the Eastern District of Virginia, that he understood his constitutional rights and the statutory rights that the judge read to him before thanking the judge very much. And then Jim Comey appeared to linger a little bit at the podium, almost as if for a moment he forgot what he was really doing there in that courtroom today, because Jim Comey, as you know, before he was the FBI director, had been a very long-serving member of the Department of Justice. In fact, he had been the Assistant United States Attorney in charge of the Richmond office of the same district that is now prosecuting him, the Eastern District of Virginia. One thing that I think is really interesting about what happened in court today is just how asymmetric the two sides seem to to see this case. From Pat Fitzgerald, who is Jim Comey's defense attorney's perspective, this is a really simple case. It can go to trial relatively quickly after we have some pretrial motions. The judge appeared to agree, but the government's description of it was that this is a case with voluminous discovery and a large amount of discovery of a classified nature. That appeared to baffle Judge Nachmanoff and have Pat Fitzgerald sort of scratching his head as well. And the judge making it very clear that in the so-called rocket docket, his courtroom was not going to be an exception, and that the presence of classified information in this case would not be an excuse for slowing it down. Whether that motion practice, on the other hand, is going to take us sideways remains to be seen, Katie.
What do you make of that, Tom?
Well, look, it doesn't surprise me that the defense is going to go after this very aggressively. They've got two kill shots ready to go for this indictment. One is to argue that this is a case of vindictive prosecution, and the other argument is that the prosecutor was unlawfully appointed. So I think from the defense's perspective, my suspicion is that they feel confident that they've got good arguments on the merits if and when this ever reaches a jury. But they don't want to wait that long. I think they are going to move very quickly. They're going to ask this judge to throw out the indictment on one of those two threshold grounds, and I think they got a decent shot at getting it.
Why do you think they have a decent shot?
Well, let's see. On selective prosecution, they've got a tweet from the president saying, prosecute Jim Comey. Okay, that's pretty good evidence. On the unlawful appointment side, I think there are fair questions as to whether or not this prosecutor who was appointed, exactly, she herself is kind of an interim appointment succeeding someone else who held an interim appointment. And lawyers will tell you, you can't always stack one interim appointment on top of the other. So I think they've got a decent argument that this indictment was void from the moment it was filed because she does not lawfully hold the office of prosecutor.
Let's bring in MSNBC senior investigative correspondent Carol Leonnig. So, Carol, a little bit earlier today, Ed Martin and Lindsay Halligan posed and posted on social media a picture saying, "Good morning, America. How's the day going?" Something like that. I wonder if this argument in court that there's going to be just tons of discovery, tons of evidence, that this case is full of classified material, whether that is going to be an effort by the government to just weigh James Comey and his lawyers down with paperwork to make them uncomfortable. And I ask that because Ed Martin in the past has said or intimated that even if we can't actually prosecute somebody, actually convict somebody, we want to make them uncomfortable. We want to make them feel the full weight of the federal government going after them.
Katie, it's such a good question, and I'm kind of grinning with one half of my mouth right now because, you know, I'm dating myself a little bit, but I watched Patrick Fitzgerald bring one of the most complicated gray mail cases in DOJ history. I don't think there's anything that's going to make him feel frightened or weighed down. The claim of so much discovery, so much classified information, Pat Fitzgerald can handle that, but that doesn't seem to be what's at issue. What seems to be at issue, according to people inside and sources that I speak to, is the government's not eager to actually try this case. They were eager to indict this case. And by the government, I mean the leadership as directed by Donald Trump. It will be very challenging and I think potentially difficult for people who are close to these prosecutors for the government who eventually agreed to take this case when all of the Eastern District Virginia prosecutors turned away and said they could not in good conscience or based on the facts pursue this case. It will be very difficult to see them go up against Pat Fitzgerald. I have seen him Ginsu knife quite a few people in cases that he's worked in. He's just quite a force, and the facts are on his side, including, you know, selective prosecution arguments, the fact that all the prosecutors who reviewed the evidence in this case with any substance said we should not pursue it. All of those things are going to be in Pat Fitzgerald and Jim Comey, his client's favor.
Unless there's something in discovery that people have not yet seen. And so far, the government has not produced any discovery, according to Pat Fitzgerald.
Well, the whole indictment is very curious because it's extremely terse. I mean, it's like by, criminal indictment standards, it's like a haiku. It's short and it's vague in the extreme. And I thought that Pat Fitzgerald had a fair point today where he says, look, we don't even know exactly what crime Comey is being charged with. I mean, it's a fundamental tenet of American law that you have to tell the defendant what crime you are accusing them of committing. And at some point, presumably, the government will. But for now, they haven't. The indictment speaks of person 1, person 2, person 3. We're all playing guessing games trying to figure out who those people are. And so I think in the next few weeks, the next few months, at some point, the government is going to have to come up and say, here's the actual crime we're charging you with. And by the way, here's some evidence
Well, the trial date is January 5th, so it's going to have to be pretty soon.
It's absolutely going to have to be soon. I don't know how you prepare a defense when you don't even know what the charge is.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, Tom Dupree, really good to have you in person. Please do always visit us when you're in town. Carol Leonnig and Lisa Rubin, thank you guys, ladies.